right now is Florida Senator Marco Rubio. He is the vice chairman of the Select Committee on Intelligence. And Senator, it's good to see you. Thanks very much for being here.
Thanks for having me on, Maria. I appreciate it.
So a couple of questions, Senator. On the one hand, how would you assess the response? Is there any red line? We watch death and destruction every day now for the last month. And what about the use of chemical weapons? Is the intelligence that you've seen corresponding that, in fact, there are chemical weapons? Is that reliable?
Well, let me talk about a couple things. The first is that the red line that we know of for sure is NATO. We have a commitment in NATO. We've made it. It's an old commitment. It's an existing commitment. And if any NATO nation comes under attack and invokes Article 5, the United States has an obligation that it will meet to join those nations in taking on the aggressor. And if that's Russia, that's what's going to happen. And that's a pretty clear red line, and one that has existed for a very long time and predates this president, and it's one I believe in and should continue. I think the likeliest thing you're going to see from Putin is trying to use chemical or biological weapons, for that matter, but doing it in a way that makes it look like someone else did it. So that's his history. For example, when chemical weapons were deployed in Syria, clearly Assad was behind it. But he spent weeks sort of building up this notion that somehow the rebels and the opposition to Assad were the ones that were going to use chemical weapons and did. And so my feeling is that that's exactly the kind of thing he would try to do here. I don't think he would himself admit that he's using these chemical weapons. I think he would want to blame that on Ukraine or NATO and say that it was them who did it. I think what's really important here is we should not be in the position of ruling out what we're going to do. We're not going to do that. We're not going to do this if he does that. I don't think we should be in a position of doing that because we don't know exactly how this is going to play out and who it's going to impact. It's possible that these kinds of attacks could very well have a direct impact on a NATO country or American personnel in the region. And then the response would be pretty clear about what we'd have to do. We'd have to go after whoever it is did that, or where they did it from.
Well, I mean, what would a potential chemical or biological weapon used look like? How would that be felt?
Well, again, going off their past history and what they've done in the past, one of the things you might see it is deployed in an urban area, and they would stage it to look like it was actually the Ukrainians who are using chemical weapons in the battlefield. Another option is a biological agent, some disease. As you've seen, they've been arguing for weeks that NATO and the United States have biochemical weapons labs inside of Ukraine. And the reason why they've been saying that for weeks, in fact, for years, is because now if something happens, they're going to argue, well, that's the Ukrainians and the Americans in NATO deploying those weapons against Russian troops, and it's spread. So that's, in my view, the likeliest approach they would take. But obviously, this is a very rapidly escalating situation, so who knows which way it will twist or turn. But that's what I think you would see, given their past history and what they've sort of been setting up and what they've been saying up to this point.
Well, Senator, you've also been very concerned about cyber attacks. You talked about the threat of a cyber attack for years. Back in March of 2020, you told us that cyber warfare was the new battlefield for the 21st century. Tell me about the potential for cyber attacks on our banking, technology, energy sectors. How concerned should we be?
Well, first of all, cyber is an ongoing threat all the time. There are a bunch of cyber criminal groups out there. These are people that hack into companies, they gain accesses, and then they sell them. They sell them out there on this dark market of selling these things, and oftentimes they're offering them to countries. They're offering them to China, and they're offering them to Russia. They're offering them to North Korea, who themselves have developed these accesses. So look, it's quite possible the Chinese could do a cyber intrusion to steal things from American companies like they do every day, hoping that Russia will get blamed for it in the process. Now, that said, I would tell you that if you look at the situation today, Putin has to change the battlefield conditions at this point. He has to regain momentum, okay? He's not going to be able to do that diplomatically. He can't do that economically. And he can't do that through his conventional weaponry. His military today is stuck in a quagmire. They're stuck. They're stalled. And so how can he escalate? He has a handful of options. We talked about chemical and biological. Cyber is another option. An attack against the United States, against one of our companies. In essence, he'll have strike options before him, and they'll say, look, we have accesses to these companies, these industries. Obviously, the ones I'd keep an eye on are telecommunications and banking and energy, oil and gas companies, because those are the ones that would most hurt the country. That would be his equivalent of sanctions against the U.S. economy.
What's your take on this partnership between China and Russia? The White House still has not told us what quote-unquote consequences Joe Biden put on the table for Xi Jinping during that phone call. Have you been briefed on the phone call between Joe Biden and Xi Jinping? And what are the consequences if China continues to support Russia?
I have not. First of all, that's the important thing we have to say is all this. I read some articles last week and columns about China's in a tough spot. They have to decide. China's already decided. Okay, Xi Jinping and China is 100% on Russia's side. Now they're going to try to hide it. They'd prefer not to be caught doing it because it hurts their, their view around the world, how people view them around the world. But they're 100% on Russia's side, and it makes I understand why. Number one, they figure as long as Russia is strong or strong enough, it distracts us from focusing on China. And the second is because they view Putin and China and Russia as their co-combatants, in essence, their partners in this broader conflict against the West and the United States. And so they're 100% with them, okay? As far as buying oil and gas from them, sure. I mean, especially now that you can buy it at a discount around the world because many oil and gas traders are reluctant to touch Russian oil and gas. I think one of the things China is going to try to do is create an alternative to the SWIFT program, to the SWIFT system, allow banking to transactions to occur electronically without having to go through SWIFT. So we need to be sanctioning every one of these Chinese entities that does business with Putin and is helping Putin evade. Simple as that. We need to announce any Chinese company or entity that is helping Russia evade sanctions will also be sanctioned.
Well, we're not, though, right? I mean, we still see Chinese companies in all of those investment portfolios across the country. The administration canceled the China initiative where the DOJ was investigating intellectual property theft. Last month, you said, despite Beijing's aggression against Taiwan, you do not expect Xi to invade Taiwan anytime soon. Do you stand by that? And has Biden's weakness changed things? Because, look, at a time that the U.S. should be, some say, decoupling from China, it seems that this administration is easing all of the Trump-era tariffs on Chinese goods and easing some of the tough stance that the Trump administration had on China.
Well, first of all, what I said about Taiwan is I don't think he's going to invade in the next 6 months, but I don't think we finish this decade without China making a move. I think certainly by the middle part of this decade, in the next few years, they're going to do something one way or the other. And I'd watch very closely in October, November this year when they have their annual party conference. They said they're going to announce a new Taiwan policy. It's very clear that for Xi, this is a key part of his personal legacy. Taiwan is to Xi what Ukraine is to Putin. He's going to do something. And their preference is for Taiwan to just surrender, to just say, look, we can't, America's not going to do anything about it. We're going to lose a war against you. We might as well surrender and negotiate the terms by which we fall under your umbrella. That I think is this priority. The Biden administration is schizophrenic about China because on the one hand, they talk about them being an adversary, a competitor. And on the other, you've got people there that are obsessed with this idea of cutting some green new global deal with China to get their cooperation on green energy and climate change and so forth. And here's the one thing they don't tell you. All those batteries, the lithium and all the minerals that go into those batteries, the rare earth minerals, the solar panels that are constructed, all these things that John Kerry and these guys fantasize about, they all come from China. And so they don't want to antagonize China. They've got to make our national security a priority ahead of that crazy stuff.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's a point to be made. Senator, it's great to see you this weekend. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me on.